Drogheda is a historic town in County Louth, about 40 kilometres north of Dublin, with roughly 40,000 residents, making it Ireland's largest town by population. Yet behind its medieval churches and bustling streets, an undercurrent of fear took hold in recent years. In the late 2010s, Drogheda became the unlikely epicenter of a brutal gangland feud that shocked Ireland. This documentary will chronicle the rise of that feud, a conflict that turned quiet residential areas into scenes of shootings and firebombs, left 4 people dead, and scarred an entire community. We follow the feud's origins, the key players on each side, and the bloody events that escalated the violence. We'll examine the horrific murder of a local teenager that marked the feud's most gruesome chapter and see how law enforcement and residents fought back. The tone is neutral and observant, but the story carries an air of tension. A town under siege from within. This is the story of the Drogheda feud, told factually and without sensationalism, focusing on what happened and its impact on society. According to Irish police and media reports, the Drogheda feud began around 2017 as a split within a local criminal gang. What had been one organized crime group, primarily involved in drug trafficking, fractured into 2 rival factions, each vying for control of the town's illicit drug trade. On one side was a faction led by Richie Carberry, reportedly aided by 2 brothers from the Moneymore housing estate on Drogheda's north side. Opposing them was a gang headed by Owen Maguire, an established Drogheda crime figure, along with his associate Cornelius Price. Price was an Irish traveller, and many of Maguire's followers also came from the traveller community, while Carberry's associates were largely settled locals. This divide may have added a social dimension to the rivalry, but at its core the feud was about power and money, control of a lucrative drug territory. Tensions simmered as both factions jockeyed for dominance in late 2017 and into 2018. Early signs of trouble were evident. There were reports of vicious brawls and intimidation in the town, but the conflict had not yet exploded into open warfare. That changed in the summer of 2018, when an attempt was made on Owen Maguire's life. On the night of 5 July 2018, a gunman arrived at Maguire's home on Cement Road, Drogheda, and opened fire. Maguire was shot multiple times at close range. At least 4 to 6 bullets hit him in the stomach and shoulder. Incredibly, he survived. Investigators later noted that 1 bullet lodged in Maguire's spine, leaving him permanently paralyzed from his injuries. The murder attempt on Owen Maguire marked the point of no return. The feud had erupted into violence. The Garda believed this shooting was the flashpoint that set off a cycle of retaliatory attacks. From that July 2018 incident onward, the 2 Drogheda gangs began trading tit-for-tat assaults. At first, these took the form of warnings and intimidation. Incidents like shots fired at the homes of rival gang members, crude firebombings, assaults with weapons, and attempts to abduct or beat individuals associated with the other side. Throughout late 2018, the violence in Drogheda escalated steadily, largely hidden under night's cover. Locals described a growing atmosphere of dread. One week in November 2018 saw a sudden spike. Petrol bombs were thrown at houses, cars were set ablaze in different neighborhoods, and a young man was kidnapped and slashed with a knife before being dumped with non-fatal stab wounds. In one incident, a viable pipe bomb was discovered attached to the car of an innocent relative of a gang member. A chilling message that even family members were not off limits. Miraculously, that bomb was defused without injury. But by now it was clear that the feud was spinning out of control. Local authorities grew alarmed. Garda in County Louth cancelled officers' annual leave and implemented a special policing plan to counter the feud. We know there were tensions. There was just something in the air that something bad may happen, recalled Councillor Kenneth Flood, chair of Drogheda's Joint Policing Committee, describing the mood in late 2018. Flood noted that after the shooting of Owen Maguire, Garda openly admitted they were stretched thin. They didn't have the resources to police the division. The criminals are looking at this, and they're thinking, "It's Christmas," he said, meaning the gangs felt emboldened by the lack of police manpower. At that time, Drogheda, a town unaccustomed to such crime, suddenly had multiple active murder investigations, unrelated to the feud, taxing local Garda. Warnings were sounded that if a gangland killing occurred, It would unleash retaliations and the violence would spiral. Unfortunately, that prediction soon proved true. Despite Garda efforts, the feud intensified. By early 2019, sporadic shootings and firebomb attacks had become a regular occurrence. The first half of 2019 saw numerous attempted murders linked to the feud, though somehow both factions avoided fatalities for a time. That fragile lull ended in mid-2019 when the feud claimed its first life. On 27 August 2019, Keith Brannigan, a 29-year-old with connections to one of the gangs, was working on the decking of a mobile home in the nearby village of Cloggerhead when a gunman approached and shot him dead. Brannigan's murder was immediately linked to the Drogheda feud. It marked a grim milestone. After over a year of low-level attacks, the feud had now produced open bloodshed. By late 2019, the town of Drogheda was under siege from this underworld conflict. Over 90 feud-related incidents had been logged by Gardaí by the end of that year, including at least 2 attempted murders, numerous assaults and petrol bombings. Residents in affected estates lived in fear of the next attack. Then, on 4th November 2019, the violence escalated further with another targeted assassination. Richie Carberry, the very man believed to be leading one faction, was returning home to the townland of Bettystown around 11:40 p.m. when a gunman ambushed him outside his house. Carberry was shot multiple times and collapsed by his front door. Despite efforts to save him, the 39-year-old died of his wounds. Carberry's murder sent shockwaves. A gang boss had been taken out on his own doorstep. Gardaí later revealed that Carberry had narrowly survived a previous attempt on his life earlier in March 2019, and he had even been formally warned by police that his life was in danger. Those warnings proved tragically justified. Investigators suspected Carberry's killers were tied to the same side that had murdered Keith Brannigan months before, indicating that Owen Maguire's faction might have been eliminating Carberry's allies one by one. Carberry's death was a major blow to his faction, leaving a leadership vacuum. It also meant that, within 15 months of the initial attempt on Owen Maguire, the gang war had now claimed 2 lives. Around this time, a notorious criminal named Robbie Lawler emerged as a key player in the feud's next phase. Lawler, a 35-year-old from Dublin with over 100 prior convictions, was the brother-in-law of Richie Carberry and had ties to that faction. He had been in prison for unrelated crimes but was released in December 2019, just weeks after Carberry's murder. Lawler was a feared figure in gangland circles, and his return to the streets was watched closely by both Gardaí and his rivals. Almost immediately, Lawler himself was targeted in an audacious act of retaliation. One night in late December 2019, as Robbie Lawler left a gym in Drogheda, he was attacked and mugged by a group of young men. The assailants filmed the humiliating assault. They stole Lawler's gym bag and even the flip-flop sandals he was wearing on his feet. In a taunting gesture, the attackers later posted photos on social media of themselves wearing Lawler's stolen flip-flops. It was a crude bit of gangland theatre, a message that even a criminal of Lawler's notoriety could be humbled on the streets of Drogheda. Lawler's enemies wanted to show they had no fear of him. By the end of 2019, the situation in Drogheda was volatile and dangerous. The feud had already seen 2 murders, Brannigan and Carberry, numerous attempted hits, and increasingly brazen attacks. The community was on edge, and local authorities feared that worse was yet to come. Unfortunately, the dawn of 2020 would bring an act of violence so brutal that it would horrify the nation and mark a turning point in the Drogheda feud. In January 2020, the Drogheda feud reached its most barbaric and tragic moment. Keane Mulready-Woods was a 17-year-old boy from Drogheda. Like some other local youths, Keane had become tangled up in the gang feud, reportedly doing low-level jobs for one faction, things like delivering messages or acting as a lookout. He had recently been convicted of an intimidation offense, suggesting he'd participated in harassing rivals on behalf of gang leaders. In the eyes of the hardened criminals, Keane was an expendable pawn. But to his family, he was just a local teenager who had made some dangerous choices. In early January 2020, Keane Mulready-Woods unknowingly stepped into a deadly trap. On the evening of 12th January 2020, Keane left his home and was last seen in Drogheda around 6 p.m. When he didn't return, his family grew concerned. Their worst fears were confirmed over the next 2 days in a series of gruesome discoveries. Late on the night of 13th of January, police in Dublin, 60 kilometres south of Drogheda, were called to the Moatview area of Coolock, where a blood-stained sports bag had been found on a roadside. Inside the bag, Gardaí discovered human body parts, dismembered limbs that appeared to belong to a young male. The next day, on 14th of January, investigators searching for more remains made another horrifying find. In the early hours of that morning, a burnt-out car was located on Trinity Terrace near Drumcondra, not far from Dublin's Croke Park Stadium. Inside the charred vehicle, police found severed human remains, including a head. Forensic teams worked urgently to identify the victim. By 15th of January 2020, Gardaí confirmed the unthinkable. The remains were those of Keane Mulready-Woods, the missing Drogheda teenager. The murder and dismemberment of a 17-year-old boy represented a shocking new low in Irish gangland crime. Seasoned detectives and the public alike were horrified at the savagery displayed. As one RTE News report put it, the ongoing Drogheda feud had reached a new level of barbarity with the murder of Keane Mulready-Woods. Keane had been brutally killed as part of the gang war, and those responsible had deliberately scattered his body parts in different locations. Investigators believed this was no random act of disposal. It was meant as a defiant message. In fact, among the remains found in Coolock were a pair of flip-flop sandals. They were the very same flip-flops stolen from Robbie Lawler during the gym mugging weeks earlier, recognizably distinctive. Detectives and criminal insiders interpreted this as a grim calling card, a warning from those behind Keane's murder that Robbie Lawler should not cross them. It was as if the killers were saying, "We got your flip-flops, and we got your young proxy too." Whether Keane was killed on direct orders of Robbie Lawler, as many suspect, or by other members of the feud, the symbolism of the flip-flops was a chilling element of this crime. News of Keane Mulready-Woods' fate sent Ireland into shock. Media headlines blared about the gruesome gangland execution of a teenager. The Taoiseach, Irish Prime Minister at the time, Leo Varadkar, voiced the nation's outrage and concern. On 17th of January 2020, Varadkar condemned the murder and announced he would seek to set up a special task force to tackle criminal feuds in Drogheda, similar to the task force established to fight gang crime in Dublin's inner city. "We are going to get these people," vowed Justice Minister Charlie Flanagan, referring to the killers. The Garda Commissioner beefed up the police presence in Drogheda, sending additional armed support units to the town. In Drogheda itself, grief and anger gripped the community. On 25th of January 2020, thousands of residents gathered for a peace rally organised by the Mayor of Drogheda. They marched in solidarity against the gangs, holding banners pleading for an end to the violence. The Mayor implored those responsible for Keane's killing to at least reveal the location of any of his remains not yet recovered. At that time, parts of Keane's body were still unaccounted for. Speakers at the rally called for tougher laws and more Garda resources, and community leaders demanded that no other child ever be caught in such a nightmare again. In February 2020, Keane Mulready-Woods was laid to rest. Mourners at his funeral heard a local priest call for an end to gang feuds and for the community to reclaim peace. The shock of Keane's murder had finally galvanized both government and the public to confront the Drogheda feud head-on. The question now was whether law enforcement could bring the feud under control before more lives were lost. Even before the murder of Keane Mulready-Woods, Gardaí had been intensifying their crackdown on the Drogheda gangs. Back in October 2018, as violence flared, police launched Operation Stratus, a sustained initiative to suppress the feud. Under Operation Stratus, local Drogheda Gardaí, bolstered by national units, engaged in an all-out campaign against the criminal groups. By May 2019, the results were evident. 319 searches had been conducted, 13 pipe bombs were seized before they could be used, 5 firearms were taken off the streets, along with over $110,000 worth of drugs and $270,000 in suspected criminal cash. Several serious crimes were intercepted. For example, 4 suspects were charged in relation to a November 2018 kidnapping, and another 4 arrests were made for an attempted murder, from February 2018. These figures showed that Gardaí were actively pursuing the gangs, even as the feud continued. Chief Superintendent Christy Mangan, the Louth Divisional Police Chief, publicly reassured Drogheda residents, "We will deal forcibly with the crime gangs and dismantle their criminal networks." He urged the community to support the police, emphasizing that a comprehensive operational plan was in place. Indeed, additional Garda recruits were sent to Drogheda to bolster the local force in mid-2019. After Keane's murder in January 2020, law enforcement pressure on the feuding gangs reached its peak. Within hours of discovering the teenager's remains, armed Garda units and forensic teams swarmed several locations in Drogheda linked to the suspects. At least 3 houses were raided on the night of 15th of January 2020 as detectives homed in on those believed responsible. One house in Rathmullen Park, a neighbourhood in Drogheda, was identified as a possible site where Keane had been held and killed, and it became a critical crime scene for forensic analysis. The investigation into Keane's murder was massive, spanning multiple counties. Police forces cooperated across the border as well, since it was feared key players in the feud might flee or have links in Northern Ireland. The Irish government poured resources into quelling the violence. In addition to Varadkar's proposed task force, Garda Commissioner Drew Harris temporarily assigned elite units, including the Emergency Response Unit, ERU, to patrol Drogheda. Armed checkpoints were set up around town, and dozens of suspects were detained or questioned in the weeks following the murder. Community policing initiatives also took place to encourage residents to anonymously provide information. These efforts were not without significant behind-the-scenes tension. It was later revealed that at the height of the feud, the Garda officer in charge of the region seriously considered requesting the deployment of the Irish Army to Drogheda's streets, an unprecedented measure for a domestic crime issue. This contingency was never ultimately needed, but the mere fact it was contemplated shows how dire the situation had become. As one veteran journalist noted, violence among the warring criminals caused such chaos that it almost led to soldiers being deployed in County Louth. A major turning point in the feud's aftermath came with the elimination of Robbie Lawler, not by police, but by apparent underworld retribution. After Keane's murder, Robbie Lawler was widely suspected to be the one who had ordered or even physically carried out the gruesome killing. Facing intense Garda scrutiny and mortal danger from rivals, Lawler left the Republic of Ireland and sought refuge in Belfast, Northern Ireland. But even across the border, his life was not safe. On the morning of 4th April 2020, Robbie Lawler arrived at a house in the Ardoyne area of North Belfast, possibly for a criminal rendezvous. As he stood outside the residence on Etna Drive around 11:50 a.m., a gunman walked up and shot Lawler multiple times at close range, killing him on the spot. The assassination was brazen, carried out in broad daylight in a suburban neighborhood. Police later noted that Lawler's reputation for brutality preceded him. He had been heavily involved in organized crime for years and was considered a prime suspect, not only in Keane Mulready-Woods' murder, but also in an earlier 2018 attempted assassination of Owen Maguire. In fact, in November 2022, Lawler was named in Irish court documents as the gunman who had shot Owen Maguire and left him paralyzed. Now, in a grim full circle, Lawler himself was gunned down. The Police Service of Northern Ireland, PSNI, arrested 3 men in connection with Lawler's killing shortly afterward. Investigators in Belfast suspected that the hit on Lawler might have been commissioned by associates of the Maguire faction as payback, both for the attempt on Maguire's life and for the horrific murder of Keane. Whatever the motive, the removal of Robbie Lawler effectively decapitated one side of the Drogheda feud's leadership. With Lawler dead and many of his lieutenants either arrested or lying low, the violence in Drogheda finally began to ebb by mid-2020. A few lingering elements of the feud played out. For example, in June 2020, a Belfast criminal with suspected links to Lawler's shooting was himself shot dead in an apparent revenge attack, showing how the feud's repercussions spilled beyond Drogheda. But within Drogheda, the Garda crackdown had a tangible effect. Through 2020 and 2021, dozens of individuals from both gangs were prosecuted for various offences: assaults, weapons possession, arson, drug trafficking, and more. The Garda Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, also moved in, freezing and seizing assets, cash, cars, properties, belonging to key figures in an effort to choke off the gang's finances. In one high-profile case, Paul Crosby, a 27-year-old gang member from the Maguire-Price faction, was arrested and later charged with facilitating the murder of Keane Mulready-Woods. In 2023, Crosby was convicted in the Special Criminal Court and sentenced to 10 years in prison for his role, specifically for luring Keane to the house where he was killed. Another accomplice, Jer Cruz, was sentenced to 7.5 years. At their sentencing, the judge described Keane's murder as a heinous and appalling crime, noting the disgraceful and inhumane way the boy's remains were treated had compounded his family's grief. By 2021, roughly 3 years after the feud began in earnest, a relative calm had returned to Drogheda. The concerted efforts of law enforcement and the elimination of key instigators led to a dramatic drop in feud-related violence. No further murders directly attributed to the feud occurred after the events of early 2020. The gang war, it seemed, had burned itself out, or been decisively quelled by Garda action. Several of the feud's lead figures were gone. Richie Carberry was dead, Robbie Lawler was dead, and Owen Maguire, the man whose shooting had sparked the feud, was alive but confined to a wheelchair, effectively removed from the street-level criminal arena. Maguire remained a focal point for police. In 2022, as noted, evidence came to light formally naming Robbie Lawler as the shooter who tried to kill him, which underscored the deadly link between these protagonists. Cornelius Price, Maguire's close ally and the other nominal gang boss, had left Ireland during the feud. He became embroiled in separate criminal charges in the UK. In February 2023, Cornelius Price died of an illness in a Welsh hospital, never having returned to Drogheda. His death, while not violent, symbolically closed another chapter of the saga. Price had been a general in this gangland war, but he passed away far from home, reportedly suffering from a neurological condition while in custody awaiting trial on unrelated charges. On the streets of Drogheda, Garda patrols remain vigilant. The heavy presence of armed officers that marked early 2020 has since scaled back, but police continue to monitor the remnants of the gangs. In late 2024, authorities were still pursuing the feud's financial and supporting networks. In December 2024, 4 women were charged with money laundering offences related to the Drogheda feud. These arrests show that although the shooting war is over, the process of fully dismantling the criminal organisations is ongoing. Gardaí have emphasised that organised crime doesn't disappear overnight. It takes sustained pressure to keep the gangs from regrouping. Indeed, law enforcement sources noted that after the death of Cornelius Price, who had been a dominant figure on one side, members of the rival faction tried to reassert control over the local drug trade. However, with most of their leadership jailed, dead, or otherwise neutralised, the feud as a violent conflict has largely been stamped out. The town of Drogheda is now left to heal from the trauma of those dark years. The human toll of the feud cannot be measured only in the lives lost to murder. Many more were indirectly scarred. Families lived in terror as gunshots rang out in their estates at night, and some innocent people were caught in the crossfire of intimidation. A local support group reports that families caught up in the Drogheda feud are experiencing severe trauma, including fear, isolation, and mental distress. The Family Addiction Support Network, FASN, which helps relatives of people involved in drugs, said in 2020 that the support system was in a crisis situation trying to cope with the fallout. Counsellors have been working with children who were afraid to sleep in their own beds due to petrol bomb attacks, and with mothers who lost sons to either death or prison as a result of the feud. As one resident put it, the feud robbed the town of its peace. Today, Drogheda is moving forward, determined not to let a few years of violence define its identity. The feud serves as a sobering case study of how quickly organised crime can wreak havoc on a community, and how important a strong, swift response is in containing such threats. The Gardaí's intense campaign, from Operation Stratus to the continued investigations, has been credited with preventing further loss of life. According to senior officers, the cooperation of local citizens in providing information and the resolve of community leaders in speaking out were crucial in ending the cycle of retaliation. As a result, by 2021, officials felt confident enough to declare that the murderous feud had been effectively ended by law enforcement efforts. One senior Garda said that in hindsight, "We seriously considered bringing in the army at the peak of the violence, but ultimately the Gardaí managed to regain control without military intervention." In conclusion, the Drogheda feud was a dark chapter in modern Irish crime history, a small town gripped by a vendetta between drug gangs, culminating in unprecedented brutality. We have presented this story factually and without embellishment. From the initial gang split and the key players who led each side, through the chronology of shootings and attacks, to the tragic death of Keane Mulready-Woods that served as a wake-up call to the nation. The police response was robust and, in the end, largely effective, though not before lives were lost and innocence shattered. The feud's aftermath leaves lessons about the lures of gang culture and the importance of early intervention. Drogheda today is healing, and its people vow that such violence must never be allowed to take root there again. The town has reclaimed its streets from the shadow of gangland terror, but it will not soon forget the lessons written in blood during those fateful years of the Drogheda feud. It's just past midnight on a quiet Limerick street. A burst of automatic gunfire shatters the silence. By dawn, a familiar headline repeats, "Another victim of the city's ruthless gang feud." Over 20 murders and countless shootings and pipe bomb attacks scarred Limerick during a decades-long war between two criminal clans. In this documentary, we chronicle the entire history of the Limerick gang feud, a gritty saga of hatred and retribution that transformed a city once nicknamed Stab City. Through cold, factual narration and suspenseful storytelling, we'll follow the feud's evolution from schoolyard spat to all-out gang war, examine key turning points, like the murders of Shane Gagan and Roy Collins, and reveal how determined policing and community courage finally brought a bloody era to heal. Limerick in the late 20th century struggled with poverty and crime. Desperate economic conditions in certain housing estates, like Moyross, Southill, St Mary's Park, bred unemployment, drug abuse, and gang activity. By the 1990s, media had unfairly branded Limerick Stab City due to its reputation for violence. It was in this climate that two former friends turned rivals would light the fuse of an infamous feud. Christy Keane, a major drug dealer and patriarch of the Keane Colopy gang in St Mary's Park, had once been close allies with Eddie Ryan, his chief enforcer. But in 2000 their alliance imploded, reportedly sparked by a petty schoolyard incident. One day, a fight between their young daughters ended with one girl slashed in the face. This insult ignited a bitter personal rift. On November 10, 2000, as Christy Keane waited in his car outside his child's school, Eddie Ryan approached and leveled a handgun at him. Click, the gun jammed, and Keane sped off, narrowly escaping death. It was an omen of chaos to come. 2 nights later, revenge came swift and lethal. On November 12th, 2 masked gunmen stormed the Moose Bar on Cathedral Place, where Eddie Ryan, age 40, sat drinking. They opened fire, executing Ryan at point-blank range as patrons dove for cover. The assassins even sprayed the bar's facade with automatic gunfire on their way out, a brazen message that the feud had begun. Ryan's young son, who had stepped into the restroom moments earlier, was spared by pure chance. With Eddie Ryan dead, Limerick's criminal underworld split into factions. On one side stood Christy Keane and his Keane Colopy gang, named for Christy and his allies, the Colopy family. On the other, Ryan's relatives allied with the McCarthy-Dundin gang, a rising crew from Ballinacurra Weston. The McCarthy-Dundin brothers, led by siblings Wayne, John, Desi and Gerard Gier Dundin, had grown up in England and returned to Limerick in the 1990s, linking with their McCarthy cousins to build a lucrative drug network. Opportunistic and vicious, the McCarthy-Dundins secretly joined the Ryan faction despite once supplying guns to the Keanes in hopes of seizing control of Limerick's drug trade. This double dealing set the stage for one of the feud's most gruesome early chapters. January 2003, the double cross, Eddie Ryan's 2 sons, Eddie Jr., 20, and Kieran, 19, suddenly vanished, reportedly abducted by armed men on Moylish Road. Rumours swirled. Had the McCarthy-Dundins kidnapped the Ryan brothers on Christy Keane's orders? In fact, it was an elaborate trap. Christy's brother, Keane, a notorious gang figure, believed he had hired the McCarthy-Dundins to execute the Ryan brothers for $60,000. On January 29, 2003, Keane, aged 36, and his associate Owen Treacy, 25, were lured to a house in Garryowen to supposedly witness the Ryans' fate. Instead, they were jumped by a group of armed men. The captors bound and beat them, then drove them to a desolate country lane in Drogheda, 5 miles outside the city. In the icy darkness, Keane was stabbed repeatedly in the face, then shot execution-style in the back of the head. Owen Treacy was stabbed 17 times in the face, head, chest, and left for dead in the mud. Astonishingly, Treacy survived his horrific injuries and managed to crawl to a nearby house for help. The next morning, in a final twist, the Ryan brothers walked unharmed into a Garda station. Their kidnapping had been a ruse all along. The double cross was complete. Christy Keane's brother was dead, and the McCarthy-Dundin-Ryan alliance had eliminated a top Keane lieutenant in one masterstroke. Investigators swiftly homed in on the culprits. Later in 2003, 5 men from the McCarthy-Dundin side were convicted of Keane's murder and given life sentences. They included Desmond "Desi" Dundin, age 20, one of the infamous Dundin brothers, and Anthony "Noddy" McCarthy, 21, along with their cohorts James McCarthy, 24, David "Frog Eyes" Stanners, 31, and Christopher "Smokey" Costello, 20. At their trial, an atmosphere of triumphalism prevailed, as if being jailed for killing a rival was a badge of honor among these young men. Independent. Independent.I. Outside the courthouse, a teenage supporter brazenly wore a T-shirt declaring, "Keanes are rats," a chilling public taunt that underscored the deep hatred fueling this war. As one Garda superintendent noted, the prime motivation in this feud is sheer and absolute hate by each side for the other. The carnage in Limerick only escalated after the double cross. With each retaliatory attack, the cycle of vengeance intensified. Throughout the mid-2000s, residential streets became war zones as tit-for-tat shootings, stabbings and pipe bombings rocked the city. Locals lived in terror of being caught in the crossfire. Notable flashpoints during these years included July 2003, Eddie Ryan's brother, John Ryan, 47, was gunned down outside a house in Thomondgate. 2 assassins on a motorcycle sped by and opened fire, killing him on the spot. The suspected shooters were barely out of their teens. Investigators believed 2 teenage gunmen carried out Ryan's murder, a sign that a new generation was being drawn into the feud. Independent.ie. October 2003, Michael "Mike" McNamara, 23, a Keane Colopy gang member, vanished. His mutilated body was found dumped on waste ground in South Ill, bound, stabbed multiple times, and shot twice. The savagery sent a clear message that no mercy would be shown to enemies. 2006, Noel Crawford, 40, was shot dead in South Ill in a case of mistaken identity. The killers had meant to hit Noel's brother, a McCarthy-Dundin associate, but murdered the wrong man. This foreshadowed an even more tragic mistaken hit to come. Also in 2006, an unrelated feud incident saw 2 young children severely burned in Moyross after gang members firebombed a car, sparking national outrage and prompting government-funded regeneration efforts in Limerick's estates. Though separate from the Keane-McCarthy feud, it exemplified how innocence increasingly paid the price. By 2007, open warfare raged. Over 100 shootings were recorded in Limerick that year alone, many linked to the feud. Residential homes were riddled with bullets as gang members attacked each other's houses indiscriminately. Crude pipe bombs were lobbed at doorsteps. Drive-by shootings occurred at all hours. For Limerick's law-abiding citizens, daily life felt like living in a conflict zone. Garda responded with armed checkpoints and frequent raids, seizing over 250 firearms in 2 years. But the gangsters were undeterred. A senior police officer grimly observed that unlike typical criminals, these young men have no fear of dying and no hesitation in killing either. Self-preservation took a backseat to hatred. Each side was willing to risk everything to inflict pain on their rivals. Intimidation and social media. As the feud dragged on, intimidation became endemic. Families of gang members were threatened, witnesses were too afraid to testify. The gangs even flaunted their bravado on early social media, such as Bebo and Facebook, posting taunts and coded threats in an effort to cow enemies and bolster their own reputations. A climate of fear enveloped the city. Many residents felt hostage to the violence, afraid to speak out. One Garda operation report in 2004 warned that if the feuding didn't stop, those involved would die in prison or die on the streets. Neither side seemed to care. In the autumn of 2008, Limerick's feud produced its most shocking victim, an innocent man whose death finally stirred an entire nation. Shane Geoghegan was a 28-year-old local rugby player, described by friends as a decent guy liked by young and old alike. He had no connection to any gang. Shane's life revolved around sports, his job as an aircraft technician, and his fiancée. But on November 9, 2008, the feud claimed his life in a tragic case of mistaken identity. In the early hours of that Sunday, Shane was walking home in the suburban neighborhood of Dougherty after watching a rugby match with friends. Meanwhile, a hitman lurking in the darkness had orders to kill a known Keane ally, Johnny McNamara, a drug dealer who lived on Shane's street. Johnny McNamara had already survived 3 assassination attempts. The gunman lay in wait. Then, spotting Shane in the dim light, a stocky man who unfortunately resembled the target, the hitman struck. A volley of gunfire shattered the quiet. Neighbors found Shane collapsed on the curb, shot multiple times. He died steps from his front door. The real target, John McNamara, was unharmed and only realized later that his friend Shane had been killed in his place. Limerick awoke that morning to national outrage. The murder of an innocent sportsman in a suburban estate, an attack reminiscent of something from Gangland, Chicago, horrified the Irish public. There were immediate comparisons to the 1996 slaying of journalist Veronica Guerin, a murder that had galvanized Ireland against the Dublin mobs. Shane Geoghegan's killing became a similar watershed moment for Limerick. Investigation and fallout. Garda launched a massive investigation, making dozens of arrests in the weeks after Shane's death. Barry Doyle, a 23-year-old dub working for the McCarthy-Dundin gang, was eventually charged as the shooter. In court, it emerged that the hit had been ordered by John Dundin, then 25, one of the feuding Dundin brothers. Dundin had allegedly given Doyle a photo and description of the target, Johnny McNamara, and supplied a gun and car. According to testimony from Dundin's former sister-in-law, April Collins, John Dundin had told the hitman in no uncertain terms, "The gun is there. You kill him." Doyle carried out the order, but killed the wrong man. In 2010, Barry Doyle stood trial for murder. The first jury deadlocked after a record 17 hours of deliberation. Doyle had recanted a confession, claiming it was coerced. A retrial in 2012 found Doyle guilty of Shane's murder, and he received the mandatory life sentence. Investigators then set their sights on the higher-ups. In August 2013, John Dundin was tried in the Special Criminal Court, a non-jury court typically reserved for terrorists, for ordering Shane's murder. April Collins bravely testified that Dundin celebrated prematurely on the night of the killing, bragging "Johnny Mac is dead," only to erupt in rage when a rival gangster informed him the wrong man was killed. The court found John Dundin guilty and sentenced him to life in prison on August 13, 2013. Equally significant was the political reaction to Shane Geoghegan's murder. The public demanded that authorities finally crush Limerick's gangs. Within weeks, Justice Minister Dermot Ahern introduced emergency legislation, the Criminal Justice Amendment Act 2009, targeting gang crime. Under these measures, those directing criminal organizations could be tried in the Special Criminal Court and face life imprisonment. Penalties for witness intimidation were boosted from 10 to 15 years, and Garda were given greater powers to hold suspects for up to 7 days. Essentially, the state repurposed laws once used against the IRA to go after Limerick's gangsters. It was a turning point, the beginning of the end of the feud's reign of terror. Despite the uproar over Shane's murder, the McCarthy-Dundin gang struck back in the most cold-blooded way by targeting the family of a man who dared to stand up to them. Roy Collins was a 35-year-old pub and amusement arcade owner in Limerick. a hard-working father of two. He wasn't involved in crime, but his family had crossed paths with the Dundins before. Roy's father, Steve Collins, had been one of the few brave citizens to testify against the gang. In 2004, Steve's testimony helped convict Wayne Dundin, the eldest Dundin brother, for threatening to kill an employee of Steve's pub over an unpaid extortion demand. The Collins family's cooperation with law enforcement made them marked targets in the eyes of the Dundin gang. On April 9, 2009, revenge came. That morning, Roy Collins was working at his business, Coin Castle Amusements, adjacent to the family pub in Roxborough. Around 12:30 p.m., a gunman walked up and shot Roy in the chest at point-blank range. As Roy collapsed, he managed to stagger toward the pub. His father Steve rushed to find him kneeling, bleeding heavily. Roy gasped, "I'm after being shot," before losing consciousness, as later recounted in court. He died shortly after, en route to the hospital. The murder of Roy Collins, another innocent, targeted out of sheer vindictiveness, stunned Ireland. It was the second high-profile slaying of an uninvolved citizen in 6 months. This time, the motive was naked retaliation, punishing the Collinses for defying the gang. Investigators soon uncovered that, from his prison cell, Wayne Dundin, aged 30, had orchestrated Roy's assassination. Wayne issued the kill order via smuggled cell phone, aiming to hit Steve Collins but murdering his son instead. The gunman, James Dillon, and getaway driver, Nathan Keane, 23, were part of the McCarthy Dundin crew. Public sentiment in Limerick reached a breaking point. The Collins family, in their grief, displayed extraordinary courage. Rather than cower, Steve Collins and his wife Carmel came forward, speaking out against the gangs. Under heavy Garda protection, they led anti-gang marches through Limerick streets, joined by thousands of residents outraged and grieving. The message was clear: the community would no longer be intimidated by thugs. As local TD, Member of Parliament Willie O'Dea put it, the stance Carmel and Steve took engendered an absolute determination by the state to take on these criminals in Limerick. The Collins family's bravery became a rallying cry. Years later, at Carmel Collins's funeral, this was remembered as the moment a city was changed. The authorities answered the call. In July 2014, the Special Criminal Court convicted Wayne Dundin and Nathan Keane of Roy Collins's murder, based largely on the testimony of an ex-gang member turned state witness. Both received life sentences. Their appeals were denied in 2017. Steve Collins and his family, under constant death threat, had to enter a witness protection-like program and relocate from Limerick for several years to stay safe. The murder of Roy Collins ultimately became the final straw that unified the city against the gangs and spurred an unprecedented crackdown. From 2009 onward, Irish law enforcement threw the kitchen sink at Limerick's gangs. Multi-agency initiatives, with codenames like Operation Platinum, targeting gang finances in 2008, and later operations under the National Organised Crime Unit, poured resources into dismantling the feuding groups. The elite Garda Regional Support Unit and Emergency Response Unit set up armed checkpoints, conducted dawn raids, and made sweeping arrests. In one massive swoop in April 2013, over 250 Garda launched synchronized raids across Limerick, Clare, and Tipperary, seizing $250,000 in cash along with drugs and weapons. The Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, also moved in to seize properties, luxury cars, and bank accounts linked to the gang bosses, hitting them in the pocket and in their wardrobes, as one report put it. Special police units, some wearing balaclavas and carrying submachine guns, became a common sight on Limerick's streets, conducting aggressive stop and searches of known gang members. From 2007 to 2013, Garda effectively waged a counterinsurgency campaign against the feuding gangs. And it worked. One by one, the major players were taken off the streets on charges ranging from murder to extortion to drug trafficking. By 2013, the Limerick feud, as it had been known, was effectively over. Garda have been extremely successful at putting the feud to a stop, one account noted, citing a dramatic reduction in violence. The statistics told the story. Some 60 key figures from both sides were behind bars. In all, almost 30 gangland figures received prison sentences during this period. This included the top leadership. Dundin brothers Wayne, John and Dessie were all serving life for murder in separate cases, and brother Gerard Ger Dundin was jailed on intimidation charges. Notorious hitmen like Barry Doyle, Shane Gagan's killer, were locked away for life. The rival Keane Colopy faction was also decimated. For example, Kenneth Colopy, a younger boss on Christy Keane's side, got life in 2012 for murdering an innocent man. Perhaps most importantly, witnesses found the courage to come forward under enhanced protection. April Collins's testimony put John Dundin away. Other insiders flipped as well, providing intelligence that helped Garda thwart murder plots and seize weapons. Under the new laws, trials of gang suspects were held before judges only, no juries, to prevent intimidation. Longer sentences for directing a criminal organization and conspiracy to murder kept the worst offenders incarcerated or awaiting trial. The message was clear. Limerick's feuding gangs would no longer operate with impunity. By mid-2013, after over a decade of bloodshed, the feud's most violent phase had finally burned out. Limerick's murder rate plummeted, and the nightly shootings ceased. In the words of one local journalist, Limerick's feud, how it started and ended, could now be written. But the story doesn't quite end there. We turn now to the fates of the feud's central characters and the lasting impact on the city they once terrorized. Gerard Dundin, age 38. The youngest of the Dundin brothers, Ger was a juvenile when the feud began, just 15 in 2002, but he quickly accumulated a criminal record for violence and intimidation. In the late 2000s, Ger was known for lower-level roles. He infamously threatened nightclub staff and others, and he served several short prison stints in Ireland. He was imprisoned for violent disorder, then released in 2014. After the feud died down, Ger relocated to England, attempting to reinvent himself under a fake name, Darren McLean. But old habits followed. In 2020, Ger was involved in a kidnap and extortion plot in the UK, a scheme to hold two brothers for a $300,000 ransom. British police captured him in a dramatic armed stop. Ger tried to smash his phone to destroy evidence as officers swarmed his van. In May 2023, a London judge sentenced Ger Dundin to 15 years in prison for conspiracy to blackmail and false imprisonment. British authorities also nailed him on a firearms charge after finding a 9mm pistol at his London hideout. Once a baby-faced delinquent of the Limerick feud, Ger Dundin is now a convicted international criminal, not due for release until at least the late 2020s. Wayne Dundin, age 42. The de facto leader of the McCarthy-Dundin gang at its peak, Wayne was notorious for terrorizing Limerick's business owners and ordering murders. In 2004, he was convicted for threatening to kill a nightclub bouncer, who was shot dead by a Dundin associate. After serving that sentence, Wayne continued to pull strings. From prison in 2009, he ordered the assassination of Roy Collins, an act that finally sealed his fate. In 2014, Wayne was found guilty of Roy's murder. The court concluded he gave the order via phone from jail and handed a life sentence. As of 2025, Wayne remains imprisoned in a high-security facility. He is in his mid-40s and will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Wayne's iron-fisted reign over Limerick's south side is over, though he reportedly still tries to exert influence through associates on the outside. John Dundin, age 35. Impulsive and volatile, John was the younger Dundin brother who arrogantly believed he could get away with murder until he didn't. John was convicted of ordering Shane Gagan's murder and given a life sentence in 2013. In court, he was so dismissive that he listened to music on headphones during proceedings. Now in prison, John will be approaching middle age by the time he's eligible for any review, likely decades from now, if ever. His conviction was a signature victory for law enforcement, removing the man behind one of Ireland's most reviled killings. Desmond Dessie Dundin, age 140. Another brother, Dessie earned his infamy by participating directly in the Keane murder in 2003. Convicted and sentenced to life at age 20, Dessie has been incarcerated since the mid-2000s. He too remains in prison to this day, one of the early casualties of the feud's tit-for-tat justice. If not for his imprisonment, Dessie almost certainly would have either been murdered on the streets or continued the cycle of killing. Instead, he'll be locked up well into old age. Keane, age 64, the man who was the initial target in 2000, survived multiple brushes with death. Christie, the patriarch of the Keane Colopy faction, had built a drug empire in the 1990s and was no stranger to violence. After the feud quieted, Christie kept a relatively low profile. But in June 2015, the long memory of Gangland nearly caught up with him. As Keane parked at the University of Limerick for a morning gym session, two masked gunmen ambushed him, firing multiple shots. Though hit several times in the upper body, the then 54-year-old Christie miraculously survived by diving behind his car and fleeing across a field. Investigators suspect that young hoods loyal to the McCarthy-Dundin-Ryan faction were behind this attempted hit, essentially revenge deferred. Christie's survival only added to his near-legendary status on Limerick's streets. In the aftermath, he was hospitalized in critical condition, but pulled through. Today, Keane remains a marked man and is reportedly under Garda watch whenever he's in public. Officially, he's a free man, having served past drug sentences, but the 2015 incident suggests he may still have been involved in the underworld, or at least perceived as a threat by rivals. Christie's continued existence is a reminder that the embers of the feud haven't completely died out. Edward "Eds" McCarthy, age 36, a cousin of the Dundins, Edward "Eds" McCarthy represents the next chapter of Limerick's gang saga. As the McCarthy-Dundin leadership was jailed, Eds McCarthy seized the opportunity to fill the power vacuum. Around 2011, Eds, then in his early 30s, relocated to Birmingham, England, essentially taking over the remnants of the Limerick gang and linking it with larger international networks. He forged alliances with infamous Irish cartel figures like Thomas "Bomber" Kavanagh and Liam Byrne, lieutenants of the Kinahan Cartel. Under Eds, the Limerick crew turned its focus to drug trafficking on a global scale, shipping cocaine and laundering money through front businesses and even horse racing operations. A rural property in Combe de Clare with a private racetrack linked to Ed's gang was seized by CAB in 2016. By 2024, Edward McCarthy had risen high enough to become a target of Britain's National Crime Agency, NCA, which suspects him of coordinating major drug shipments and gun running. The NCA has been building a case to extradite Eds McCarthy to the UK for prosecution. Essentially, Eds exported Limerick's gangland enterprise overseas, joining forces with the Kinahan Cartel's Super Gang in a bid to stay a step ahead of Irish authorities. As of 2025, Eds McCarthy remains at large, rumoured to be moving between Ireland, the UK, and mainland Europe, but very much on the radar of international law enforcement. His story is a testament to how the tentacles of Limerick's feud extended beyond Ireland, connecting with larger criminal networks. By the mid-2010s, the open warfare that had earned Limerick its Stab City moniker was essentially quelled. Murders and shootings plummeted. The city began to shed its unfair, violent reputation with renewed investment in housing, education, and community programs. A notable initiative was the Shane Gagin Trust, founded by Shane's family and sports figures, which engages at-risk youth in sports and creative activities as alternatives to crime. The ultimate legacy of the feud is perhaps a stronger civic spirit in Limerick, a resolve to never let such darkness take hold of the city again. And yet, has the violence truly ended? Officials warn that the feud's embers still smoulder. Many of the original gang leaders may be imprisoned or dead, but younger criminals, sometimes called gangland legacy players, continue to feud on a smaller scale. In recent years, a group known as the Keane Colopy faction, the old rivals of the McCarthy-Dundins, has reportedly been involved in spats with a new generation of troublemakers. In 2020 and 2021, Limerick saw a rash of car bombings, arson attacks, and assaults reminiscent of the bad old days. As one local Garda source noted, the gang who filled the void left by the Dundin McCarthys have taken over. They're still dictating everything from prison, indicating that even behind bars, gang leaders attempt to pull strings. In 1 week of April 2025, Army EOD specialists were called out twice to defuse crude bombs left outside homes in Limerick's south side. Houses were firebombed and innocent residents injured as reckless new players tried to settle scores. It was an eerie throwback to the height of the feud, proving that while the old war was won, the battle against gangland violence is never truly over. The Limerick gang feud left an indelible mark on the city and Ireland as a whole. Over 15 years, the feud evolved from a personal clash between former friends into a full-blown criminal war that claimed at least 20 lives, among them innocent souls whose only crime was being in the wrong place or having the courage to do what was right. It forced innovations in law enforcement and legal strategy, as the state adapted methods used against terrorism to combat homegrown organized crime. It pushed a community to its brink, and then, in the Collins family and others, revealed extraordinary bravery and resilience that ultimately turned the tide. Today, Limerick is healing. The city's darkest days are taught as cautionary history, and community-led efforts strive to ensure that young people have alternatives to the path of violence. But the feud's lesson resonates far beyond Limerick. It's a stark reminder of how absolute hatred can spiral into carnage independent.ie, and how only a concerted stand by authorities and ordinary citizens together can break the cycle. In the end, the Limerick feud had no winners, only widows, graves, and a city scarred but still standing. The gang leaders who once swaggered with impunity now sit in concrete cells. Their reign of terror has been dismantled piece by piece by detectives' persistence and neighbors' refusal to be cowed. A community that was on its knees fought back and reclaimed its streets. Limerick's story is one of redemption hard won. The feud that once plunged the city into fear has, through its very horror, forged a stronger resolve that evil will not be allowed to triumph, so long as good people refuse to do nothing. The final chapter on the Limerick feud is still being written, but one truth stands clear. When a community stands up to crime, even the most vicious of feuds can, at last, be put to rest. It's a warm Saturday night in June 2018. Outside the North Romford Community Centre in East London, the ground is slick with spilled drinks and blood. What began as a 16th birthday party has descended into chaos. Dozens of teenagers sprint through the dark parking lot, screams piercing the air, while a few grainy smartphone cameras capture every second. In the middle of it all lies a 15-year-old boy gasping for breath. He's been stabbed twice, one wound straight to the heart. Moments ago, he was known as rising drill rapper Young Valenti, but now he's dying on the asphalt as sirens wail in the distance. The attackers melt away into the panicked crowd, their identities hidden by hoodies and the night. On social media, footage of the fatal attack is already up on Snapchat, spreading the horror beyond this parking lot. This is the world of C17, a gang where teenage beefs turn into real bloodshed. The murdered boy's name is Jordan Dougherty, the younger brother of C17's leader. Minutes earlier, he'd been performing drill music at the party, showing off in front of friends. Now he's another statistic in London's wave of youth violence. As paramedics arrive and frantic phone calls are made, one question hangs in the air. How did we get here? Who are C17, and why did a kid have to die over a teenage feud? To answer that, we must rewind the clock and head east to where it all began. Our story starts in Thurrock, Essex, on the fringes of Greater London. By 2017, this suburban area, known for its shopping malls and quiet housing estates, had a dark undercurrent. A new gang was emerging, calling themselves C17. Police would later say the name was as mysterious as the gang's sudden rise. Some locals whispered it might stand for a postcode or a code, and others joked it was the Chapter 17 of some criminal playbook. The truth remains buried. What's clear is that around spring 2017, a group of local youths formed a tight crew and began carving out a drug-dealing empire in Thurrock. At the center was 18-year-old Roland Dougherty, better known by his alias Valenti. He was just a teenager from Chafford 100, a relatively nice neighborhood, but by age 18, he had a crew of younger teens and a few hardened older members under his sway. Dougherty lived on Cardinal Road in Chafford 100, just a stone's throw from the Into Lakeside shopping centre, and he knew the area's potential. By May 2017, Essex Police's Operation Raptor, a special anti-gang task force, had picked up the first hints of C17's activities. Reports came in of drug deals in broad daylight at Graystown Park, of schoolboys suddenly flush with cash, and of teenagers lurking in the alleys in groups, faces covered by pulled-up hoodies. Roland Valenti Dougherty wasn't acting alone. C-17 quickly grew to include at least a dozen members, ranging in age from mid-teens to mid-20s. Among them, 22-year-old Iomide Riggs Olabigbe, a tall, street-savvy enforcer from Willow Street in Romford; 19-year-old Rhys Stoddart of London Road, Grays, who handled local deals; and 25-year-old Bill Montero of Darnley Road, Grays, the eldest of the group, providing a veneer of experience. They were an unlikely band, some still in school, others ostensibly adults, but together they were C-17, and they were about to make their presence felt. Almost immediately, C-17 earned a reputation for unprecedented levels of crime in Thurrock. They weren't just selling bags of cannabis in park corners, they were running a ruthless drug operation. Locals in Grays and nearby towns would see scowling youths on bicycles or mopeds, suspected of ferrying crack cocaine and heroin to customers. If anyone got in their way, C-17 retaliated without mercy. Acid attacks, stabbings, and robberies became shockingly frequent in 2017. One evening in November 2017, shoppers at the crowded Lakeside shopping centre were caught in chaos when an acid attack unfolded inside a McDonald's. Witnesses saw a fight break out between two groups of youths, punches thrown, then a sudden splash of liquid and screams as two young women felt their skin burn. Police later arrested a 16-year-old from Romford and a 17-year-old from Dagenham for that targeted attack with a corrosive substance. It was an early sign that C-17's feud with rival East London gangs was starting to spill into public view. Some say the brawl was a chance encounter with their rivals from Beckton. Others believe it was an arranged showdown. The truth remains buried. C-17's rise was fueled not just by brutality, but by a savvy use of social media and music. The crew embraced drill music, a raw and aggressive rap genre that had become the voice of London's street gangs. They formed a drill group under the same name, C-17, and started releasing tracks online, garnering views and infamy in equal measure. Their lyrics were filled with coded references to real attacks, boasts about stabbing opponents, and warnings to anyone who crossed them. In one early track, Dougherty boasted about splashing, stabbing rivals, and making money on the roads, while another member dropped a chilling line about acid in a cup ready for a face, hints of crimes that had actually happened on Thurrock's streets. Police and community members grew alarmed as YouTube and Instagram became battlegrounds. C-17 would post a menacing video. Their rivals, like the Peckham Boys from Newham, would answer with an insult or a challenge, and the cycle would continue. Some community elders whisper that older gangsters manipulated these social media feuds from behind the scenes, pitting the young groups against each other for territory. The truth remains buried. Wearing black hoodies and balaclavas, C-17 members flaunted their presence in provocative drill music videos online. In these clips, they brandished machetes, knives, even the occasional handgun, all while tossing gang signs and spitting lyrics laced with threats. The online bravado only poured fuel on the fire. Their enemies watched these videos on YouTube or Snapchat and felt the sting of each insult. Every new upload was a challenge, a dare that practically guaranteed retaliation in the real world. Drill music became both C-17's soundtrack and their announcement of war. A former gang member, Raheel Butt, even compared these videos to terrorist recruitment, saying London gangs were radicalizing vulnerable kids just like ISIS would, only with a different narrative. It was working. Scores of local teens idolized C-17's flashy lifestyle. The designer belts, the rental cars in music videos, the wads of cash, and some started hanging around, eager to prove themselves. But behind the glamour, C-17's business was ugly. They exploited children as young as 13 or 14, known as youngers, to run drugs and cash between Thurrock and London. Kids who should have been in school were instead riding trains or buses with packages of crack cocaine, looking out for police as spotters, while older teens made sales. The gang even preyed on vulnerable girls, many just 14 or 15, some reported missing from home. These girls would be groomed to hide drugs and weapons, or passed around at trap houses, drug dens, as a form of reward or coercion. It was child sexual exploitation under the guise of gang loyalty, and it left scars on a community that had never seen anything like this before. "They were terrorizing us," one local parent later said to a reporter, describing how no park or mall felt safe with C-17 around. Andrew Mariner of Essex Police put it bluntly, the gang's reign brought unprecedented levels of fear and violence to the area. And as C-17's profits and notoriety grew, so too did the target on their backs. They had muscled in on territory and drug lines that other gangs, including groups from Beckton and Canning Town in East London, fiercely defended. A gang war was brewing, mostly hidden in veiled threats on drill tracks and Snapchat stories. It wouldn't stay hidden for long. By early 2018, the feud between C-17 and their rivals was escalating from online taunts to real-world violence. Tit-for-tat attacks began occurring with alarming frequency. Cars crept through estates at night with guns brandished out the window looking for targets. Machete fights broke out by corner shops in Grays. Each side was testing the other's limits. And then came that fateful night, June 23, 2018. C-17 members, including 15-year-old Jordan Young Valenti Dougherty, attended a birthday party at a community hall in Romford. The event, hosted by a teenage girl, was advertised publicly on social media, meaning dozens, then hundreds of youths showed up, many with no connection to the birthday girl. Among the crowd were gatecrashers from Newham, some of whom were linked to the rival Beckton gang, according to later whispers on the street. The recipe for disaster was set. Sometime after 9 p.m, fights erupted inside the party when the uninvited were asked to leave. The brawl spilled outside, growing larger and more frenzied. In the chaos, Jordan Dougherty became a prime target. He was chased by a large pack of youths along Clockhouse Lane. Witnesses would later describe seeing Jordan trip or get cornered, and then a smaller group of males surround him once he fell. They punched, kicked, and stomped him mercilessly. Amid the beating, a knife flashed. Jordan was stabbed twice, including a fatal wound that pierced his heart. Onlookers screamed and scattered as Jordan collapsed. Incredibly, almost the entire attack was filmed. Grainy video showed a mob stomping on someone on the ground, and that clip hit Snapchat within minutes. By the time police and medics arrived, it was too late. Jordan Young Valenti Dougherty died there on the pavement at age 15, the first murder victim directly tied to C-17's feud. The aftermath was immediate and intense. News of a drill rapper killed after a 16th birthday party made headlines, fueling a national debate about youth violence and drill music. Detectives launched a murder investigation and soon realized this was far from a random fight. It had gang fingerprints all over it. Within days, multiple teenagers were arrested, including a 17-year-old from Newham, East London, a 16-year-old from Dagenham, and a 17-year-old from Canning Town. These were boys not much older than Jordan himself, yet allegedly part of the crew that killed him. For legal reasons, the youngest attackers' names were withheld, but word spread that Peckham Boys were involved. Rumors swirled on YouTube comment sections and street corners. Was Jordan killed in retaliation for a prior stabbing? Had he been specifically targeted because of his brother Roland's leadership of C-17? Police would only say they could not establish a clear motive beyond the chaos of the night. The truth remains buried. Jordan Dougherty was just 15 years old, a little brother, a drill artist, a child drawn into gang life. He had taken the alias Young Valenti after his brother Roland Valenti Dougherty, trying to follow in his footsteps as a rapper. In photos, Jordan often wore a black tracksuit and a Louis Vuitton belt buckle, mimicking the style of older gang members. That night in Romford, he paid the ultimate price for these associations. The community was heartbroken. At a candlelight vigil in Grays, Jordan's mother stood among tearful neighbors, pleading for an end to youth violence. But behind the grief, C-17 was seething. Losing Jordan was a personal blow to the gang's leader. Roland Dougherty had not only lost his brother, but also lost face. In the brutal code of the streets, revenge would be expected. The authorities, meanwhile, were determined to prevent an all-out gang war from erupting after Jordan's murder. The Metropolitan Police and Essex Police flooded the area with officers, watching both C-17 and their rivals closely. In late 2018, at London's Old Bailey Court, a 17-year-old from Newham was found guilty of Jordan's murder, and eventually jailed for 15 years. Two other teens, one from Dagenham, one from Canning Town, were convicted of plotting to cause grievous harm in the same incident. The convictions brought a measure of justice on paper, but on the streets, tensions were still at a boiling point. C-17 wanted payback, and their rivals were ready for whatever came. It was a powder keg, one that law enforcement desperately sought to defuse. Even before the blood had dried from that summer night, authorities accelerated an unprecedented crackdown on C-17. Essex police, working with Thurrock Council, gathered every bit of evidence they could. CCTV of drug deals, testimony from frightened residents, screenshots of brazen YouTube videos. In October 2018, they took a bold step. Chelmsford County Court granted a sweeping gang injunction against C-17's known members. It was one of the broadest orders ever issued against a gang in the UK. The injunction named 9 individuals, 4 adults and 5 teens, as C-17 members and imposed strict rules on them. Under this court order, C-17's leaders were essentially put in a straitjacket. They were banned from entering large parts of Thurrock, specifically Gray's Town Centre and Park, the Seabrook Rise Estate, Gray's Beach Riverside Park, and the entire Lakeside shopping complex. These were their old stomping grounds and profitable drug spots. Now, if they set foot there, they could be arrested for mere presence. The injunction also took direct aim at their intimidating image and online presence. No more wearing hoodies or face coverings in public to stop them from concealing identity, no congregating in groups larger than 2, and absolutely no creating or posting drill music that incites violence or references C-17. Essentially, the gang's free reign on the streets and the internet was over. As Chief Superintendent Mariner declared, "We won't stop until this violence is removed from our streets." For residents of Thurrock, beleaguered by 2 years of C-17 terror, the injunction brought an immediate sigh of relief. Council leader Rob Gledhill noted a marked difference in quality of life once the order came down. But C-17 did not give in so easily. Roland Valenti Dougherty, the 18-year-old reputed leader, chafed under the new restrictions. He moved out of Thurrock, relocating to an address on Abersham Road in Dalston, East London by 2020, perhaps thinking distance would grant him freedom. It didn't. Police kept him on a tight leash. Under the injunction, Dougherty had to register any phone or SIM card with the police and provide access to his phone on demand. He was forbidden from contacting a long list of associates, even over social media. Surveillance on him was intense. Still, Dougherty's defiant streak remained. Just 9 months after the court order, he secretly participated in a new drill music video titled Bro Code. In it, masked up alongside others, he rapped about pulling the trigger twice on a gun, dealing drugs and carrying weapons, precisely the kind of violent bravado the court had outlawed. The video went online in June 2019, a blatant challenge to the injunction. It didn't take long for Essex Police's gang unit to notice. They hired a drill translation expert to painstakingly decode Dougherty's lyrics for the court, proving that the song was filled with threats and references to gang activity. In October 2019, Dougherty was hauled back into Chelmsford County Court for breaching the injunction. The judge didn't take it lightly. Roland Valenti Dougherty, now 19, was sentenced to 19 weeks in prison for his starring role in that drill video. It was a short, sharp shock meant to show C-17 that the police meant business. And Dougherty wasn't the only one caught. That same autumn, 2 other core members faced the consequences of defying the injunction. Talik Zeds Mualim, a 19-year-old from Gillingham, Kent, who was closely tied to C-17, was found in August 2019 wearing a forbidden hoodie and walking side by side with a fellow gang member in Maidstone town centre. It was a direct breach of the no hoodies, no associating rule. Mualim was promptly jailed for 12 weeks in November 2019 for that violation. Meanwhile, his companion that day, 19-year-old Sahin S.J. Korta Haupt, had already been sentenced to 129 days in a Young Offenders Institute just weeks earlier, after he breached the injunction by appearing in a violent rap video online. One by one, C-17's most brazen members were being picked off and put behind bars, if only for a few months at a time. By the end of 2019, the once notorious C-17 gang was on the ropes. The relentless police pressure was working. A number of the younger teens in the gang had been steered away into youth programs, cutting ties with C-17 altogether. Several older members moved out of the area, some to nearby towns, some even farther, in hopes of a fresh start or simply to avoid constant police scrutiny. At a community meeting in Grays, an Essex police officer held up C-17 as a success story of suppression, describing how a combination of injunctions, arrests, and community outreach had broken the gang's back. Of course, on the streets, some wondered if the calm would last. Was C-17 truly finished, or just regrouping out of sight? For the moment, though, Thurrock enjoyed relative peace. The gang's hierarchy was fractured. Its leader, Dougherty, had been publicly humiliated and jailed, albeit briefly. Other key players were locked up or laying low. It seemed the C-17 chapter might finally... And yet, in the underworld, things are rarely so simple. Even as most C-17 members went quiet, violence still flickered on the periphery. Some of the gang's hardest young men weren't ready to retire. Perhaps they felt invincible or owed a debt of vengeance. Whatever the reason, the bloodshed was not quite over. Just after midnight on July 1st, 2020, a harrowing incident proved that C-17's flame had not been fully extinguished. In the town of South Ockendon, Thurrock, a man in his mid-20s was driving through a quiet residential area when he noticed headlights bearing down on him. A grey BMW X5 was tailing him aggressively. Sensing danger, the driver tried to speed off, but the SUV gave chase. Engines roared as they raced through the dark streets. The BMW's occupants were young men, and they were out for blood. At a sharp turn on Arrisdale Close, the victim's smaller car couldn't outrun the powerful X5. He bailed out on foot, running for his life. But the BMW's crew chased him down, wielding machetes that glinted in the streetlights. They caught him, blades swinging. In a frenzied attack, they hacked at him repeatedly, leaving the man crumpled and bleeding on the pavement. The assailants then jumped back into the BMW and sped off, thinking they'd gotten away with attempted murder. Unbeknownst to them, a witness had already called the police and given a partial plate number for the getaway car. Within minutes, an Essex police helicopter was up in the night sky, its thermal camera scanning the roads. The grey BMW X5 was spotted heading out of Thurrock. When ground units tried to stop it, the driver made a desperate move, tearing onto the A127 highway in the wrong direction, speeding into oncoming traffic at 80+ miles per hour. For several heart-pounding moments, the SUV barreled down the wrong side of the road, forcing other cars to swerve. The helicopter recorded everything with eerie clarity. Finally, armed officers performed a tactical maneuver and spun the BMW out on a residential street in Upminster. The vehicle's doors flew open as the gangsters inside tried to flee on foot. One suspect, the 22-year-old driver, Bradley Dulieu, was immediately grabbed at the car. Another, 20-year-old Talik Zeds Mualim, sprinted but was caught after a short chase, the same Zeds who had repeatedly thumbed his nose at the injunction before. The third man, 23-year-old Jay Hersham, bolted through back gardens, even leaping over fences. In a bizarre twist, Hersham hid inside a stranger's hot tub, submerging himself in the warm water to evade detection. But the police helicopter's infrared camera saw the heat of his body in the tub. Within minutes, armed officers had the jacuzzi surrounded. Hersham was yanked out, soaked and shivering, and visibly splattered with blood from the attack. The chase was over. The South Ockendon victim miraculously survived his wounds, though they were life-changing injuries. As for the attackers, they turned out to be affiliated with C-17, or what was left of it. Talik Zeds Mualim had been one of C-17's most aggressive members. Now he'd graduated to attempting murder. In court, prosecutors outlined a story of gangland retribution. They suggested, though without naming C-17 explicitly, that this trio had hunted down a man over some underworld dispute. Some speculated it was payback on a rival dealer encroaching on their turf. Others whispered it was a revenge hit related to Jordan's death 2 years prior. Again, the full truth remains buried. What's certain is that justice came swiftly. Following a trial at Basildon Crown Court, Hersham and Mualim were convicted of attempted murder, while the driver Dulieu was found guilty of grievous bodily harm with intent. In March 2022, a judge threw the book at them. Hersham received 24 years in prison, Talik Zed's Mualim got 23 years, and Duliu was jailed for 10 years. It was one of the longest sentences connected to C-17's reign of violence, a final message that the law's patience had run out. Detective Superintendent Natalia Ross, speaking after the sentencing, summed it up. "This was a brutal and prolonged attack. Such was the ferocity, he is lucky to be alive." The gang that once terrorized Thurrock had effectively destroyed itself, member by member, through an endless cycle of vendettas. Today, the C-17 gang is a shadow of its former self. In just a few years, it went from a group of cocky teenagers ruling the streets of Grays and Chafford Hundred to a scattered collection of jailed felons and chastened youths. Who's dead? Tragically, Jordan Young Valenti Dougherty, age 15, lost his life before it had barely begun. His name is now etched on a memorial in his hometown, a warning of what the gang life can lead to. Who's in prison? Roland Valenti, Dougherty himself, narrowly avoided a long prison stint but remains under strict watch. However, several of his lieutenants did not escape fate. Talik Zed's Mualim will be behind bars well into his 40s after that machete attack conviction. The 17-year-old from Newham who murdered Jordan is serving a 15-year sentence and will be a grown man when he ever tastes freedom. Other C-17 affiliates, from the ones who breached injunctions to those involved in violent plots, have served or are serving time in young offender institutes. Iomide Riggs, Ola Bigbe, Reese Stoddart, Bill Montero. Their names surfaced in the injunctions, but since then they have vanished from the street scene of Thurrock. Some reportedly moved away and started new lives, distancing themselves from the C-17 banner. And who's still active? By most accounts, C-17 as a gang has been dismantled. The gang injunctions, combined with relentless enforcement, broke the group's back. Many of the younger members took the off-ramp offered by authorities, youth programs, job training, a chance at normalcy. A few diehards tried to keep the flame alive through 2020, but with them now imprisoned, no one openly claims C-17 on the streets anymore. Roland Dougherty, now in his early 20s, has reportedly rebranded himself in music. Out of prison and purportedly going by a new stage name, YNGI, he's released tracks online that steer clear of the overt violence that got him in trouble. Perhaps he's trying to pivot to a career as a legitimate artist, shedding the gang persona. Or perhaps it's just an illusion. The injunction on him remains in force, and police likely still check his social media activity regularly. If he slips up, they'll be ready. For the people of Thurrock and East London, the tale of C-17 is a cautionary saga, a true crime story of how quickly things spiraled out of control when social media bravado, turf rivalries, and youthful impulsiveness combined. It's the story of school kids transformed into knife-wielding gangsters, of a quiet commuter town that briefly became a war zone. It's also a story of what it took to stop them, an extraordinary legal crackdown and a community's refusal to be terrorized. And yet, as the dust settles, an uneasy question lingers. Was this really the end of C-17? Gangs don't issue press releases when they shut down. They fade, they splinter, they change names. Maybe C-17's remnants have quietly merged into other crews, or maybe some younger brother of a jailed member will one day raise the flag again under a new name, for revenge or for clout. The truth remains buried. In the end, the story of C-17 closes with more of a whimper than a bang. No triumphant last stand, just arrests and sentences in sterile courtrooms, and young men trading their hooded jackets for prison jumpsuits. But the legacy of fear they left will take longer to erase. On the housing estates of Grays, older residents still remember the summers of gang fights and sirens. Some of those vulnerable kids C-17 once preyed on are now struggling young adults, trying to heal and rebuild their lives. The scars, physical and psychological, run deep, and so the final lines of this saga read like a warning. C-17 rose fast, fell faster, its leaders are dead, imprisoned, or disappeared. Its story stands as a grim lesson in modern gang culture, the way social media can amplify violence, the way innocent communities can be caught in the crossfire, and how even the young are not spared the consequences. In the shadows of London and Essex, there will always be another gang eager to fill the void. But for C-17, this is where we leave them. A name that once struck fear, now reduced to a case study for police and a fading memory for those who lived through it. Their reign is over, but the questions it raised remain, unanswered, unresolved, and unrevealed. In the world C-17 inhabited, the only certainty is that nothing stays buried forever. And the truth, for now, remains buried. October 1996, in the quiet Dutch town of Sassenheim. Before dawn, a team of heavily armed officers storms through the gates of a luxury villa. They know exactly who they're looking for, and they're prepared for war. Inside, amid plush furnishings and high-tech security, they find what they expected. Piles of cash, stacks of cocaine and cannabis, even hand grenades and military-grade CS gas canisters. The haul is worth over £100 million. At the center of it all, caught in the raid, is a Liverpool-born gangster with a wry smile on his face. This is Curtis "Cocky" Warren, once Interpol's most wanted target, a man who built a global drug empire from nothing and now a prisoner surrounded by the spoils of his own empire. Curtis Warren's journey from the streets of Toxteth, Liverpool, to the pinnacle of the international drug trade reads like a Hollywood script, except it's all brutally real. He grew up in a rough neighborhood and found trouble early. By his teens, he had a reputation on the streets and a string of petty crimes to his name. Still a juvenile, he was thrown into a Borstal, Britain's youth detention, for theft. A few years later, as a young man, he did time for armed robbery. But even those early stints behind bars only hardened him. Warren emerged in the 1980s as an ambitious figure with a chip on his shoulder and his sights set on the top of the underworld. Back on the outside, Warren took a seemingly straight job as a bouncer at a Liverpool nightclub. But the club's door was really his gateway into the drug scene. Late-night venues were where the city's dealers did business, and as the doorman, Warren controlled who got in. He rubbed shoulders with suppliers and pushers, quietly soaking up knowledge about how narcotics flowed through the city. It was an education in the economics of crime. With keen street smarts and fearless ambition, Curtis Warren learned every lesson the nightlife could teach about the drug trade. The bouncer from Toxteth was about to leap from petty criminality into the big leagues of international smuggling. By the late 1980s, Curtis "Cocky" Warren had earned his nickname through sheer audacity. He wasn't content with Liverpool's small-time deals in back alleys. He wanted to run the show. Warren struck a partnership with a well-connected associate from Middlesbrough named Brian Charrington. Together they set their sights on an enormous prize, cocaine by the ton. In 1991, using Charrington's yacht, they sailed across the Atlantic to South America and met with members of Colombia's notorious Cali cartel. The plan they brokered was as daring as it gets: smuggle a huge load of cocaine into the UK encased in lead ingots, a method nearly impossible for customs scanners to detect. It sounded like a plot from a thriller, and incredibly it worked, at least the first time. When their test shipment arrived on British shores, customs officers drilled into one of the heavy metal blocks but found nothing and waved it through. Unbeknownst to them, inside other ingots was cocaine worth tens of millions. Emboldened, Warren and Charrington immediately set a second nearly 1-ton consignment in motion. But by the time this larger load was crossing the ocean, international law enforcement was onto the scheme. In early 1992, as the second shipment landed, police pounced. Warren, Charrington, and 24 others were arrested in one of the biggest drug busts Britain had ever seen. It looked like Warren's meteoric rise had come to a sudden crashing end, but his legend was just getting started. In an almost unbelievable twist, the massive case collapsed before it ever reached trial. During preliminary hearings, it emerged that Charrington, Warren's partner, was secretly a police informant. His handlers in the crime squad had tried to shield him, but in doing so, they sabotaged their own case. In 1993, all charges were dropped. Curtis Warren strolled out of Newcastle Crown Court a free man, beating a bust that should have put him away for decades. As he passed the stunned customs officers, legend has it, Warren delivered a final parting shot. "I'm off to spend my $87 million from the first shipment, and you can't for cunning touch me." True or not, that quote spread like wildfire. Cocky. Warren's reputation as the untouchable kingpin grew to mythic proportions. Free and flush with cartel cash, Warren wasted no time building a drug empire of unprecedented scale. By the mid-1990s, he funneled his profits into a web of properties and front businesses across Europe, from villas on the Spanish coast to a vineyard in Bulgaria, and stashed huge sums in secret bank accounts in Switzerland. Crucially, he kept all his dealings off paper. Warren had a near photographic memory. Contacts, bank codes, drug ledgers, everything stayed in his head. On the phone, he spoke only in code names. This discipline earned him trust from Colombian cartels and Turkish hashish suppliers alike. They extended him unlimited credit, knowing this Liverpool-born trafficker could move their product and pay on time. By this point, Warren was operating on a level no British criminal had before. A ghost with a fortune pulling the strings of a global narcotics network. In 1995, with British and European authorities closing in, Warren slipped away to the Netherlands and settled into a secluded upscale villa. By now, he was at the top of Interpol's target list, Europe's most wanted drug trafficker. Law enforcement from multiple countries was tracking his moves, waiting for any misstep. It came on an October morning in 1996, the very raid we began with. Dutch special forces smashed into Warren's Sassenheim hideout and caught him red-handed. The volume of contraband seized was staggering, hundreds of kilos of cocaine, heroin and cannabis, plus grenades, guns, and over $1 million in cash. It was as if they had raided a warehouse belonging to a South American cartel, but it was all right there under a British kingpin's control. This time, there were no lucky breaks or technicalities to save him. Curtis Warren was convicted in a Dutch court for trafficking on an epic scale and for weapons offences. The man British newspapers now dubbed the UK's Pablo Escobar was handed a 12-year prison sentence in a maximum security facility. Not long after, the Sunday Times Rich List made an eyebrow-raising note of Warren as a property developer worth around $40 million, a nod to the wealth he'd amassed from crime. Authorities believed his true fortune was far higher, but they could barely scratch the surface of it. Even as he languished in a cell, his millions remained hidden behind layers of false names and offshore accounts. Warren might be locked up, but his money and his mystique stayed stubbornly out of reach. Prison was no refuge for a man like Warren. In 1999, at a Dutch prison, a fellow inmate tried to attack him in the exercise yard. Warren fought back viciously, and the man later died of his injuries. Warren claimed self-defense, but Dutch judges ruled he used excessive force. He was convicted of manslaughter and had 4 years added to his sentence. It was a grim reminder that even behind bars, Curtis Warren was still living by the law of the jungle. Astonishingly, incarceration barely slowed his illicit activities. Dutch authorities alleged that even in solitary confinement, Warren was trying to orchestrate drug deals through messengers on the outside. In 2005, they charged him with running a smuggling ring from his prison cell. Considered so dangerous that he was shuffled between 6 prisons for security, Warren went on trial yet again. He was initially found guilty, though he later won an appeal on a technicality. By the time he finally walked free in June 2007, he had spent about 10 years in Dutch custody, much of it in isolation. The question loomed, after a decade locked away, would cocky Warren pick up right where he left off? Curtis Warren stepped out of prison in the Netherlands in 2007, a free man, and almost immediately went back to doing what he knew best. Now in his mid-40s, after years behind bars, he might have chosen to keep a low profile. Instead, within weeks he surfaced in the tiny Channel island of Jersey, apparently drawn by its lucrative drug market. On Jersey, cocaine and cannabis sold for triple their UK price, the kind of profit margin Warren couldn't resist. He quietly began plotting to smuggle a large shipment of cannabis into the island, partnering with a handful of trusted Liverpool associates. It was a brazen move by a man who had been free for barely a month, but law enforcement was already on to Warren from the moment he set foot in Jersey. After weeks of secret surveillance, tailing him on country lanes, monitoring his phone calls, the authorities decided to strike before any drugs changed hands. In July 2007, before Warren's Jersey smuggling plot could unfold, armed officers cornered him in a car and arrested him. The underworld boss, who thought he was steps ahead, had been under the microscope all along. Curtis "Cocky" Warren, once again, found himself in handcuffs, facing yet another major trial. His 2009 trial in Jersey was a spectacle. Here was Britain's most infamous drug lord being prosecuted on a peaceful island more accustomed to tourists than gangsters. Warren's lawyers fought hard, challenging the covert surveillance tactics. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. In October 2009, he was found guilty of the Jersey conspiracy. That December, he was handed a 13-year prison sentence. Warren betrayed no emotion as the judge delivered the term. The man who once sat atop a multi-million-pound drug empire was now destined to spend another long stretch behind bars. Determined to hit him where it hurt, authorities slapped Warren with a nearly $200 million confiscation order, essentially a bill for his drug profits. He refused to pay a penny, choosing to serve extra years rather than give up his hidden fortune. In the end, he served around 14 years for the Jersey case, much of it in Britain's toughest prisons. Out of sight and growing older, he faded from public view. Yet within the underworld, his name lived on as a legend, a cautionary example of how even the mightiest crime lords eventually fall. In late 2022, Curtis "Cocky" Warren finally walked out of prison again, now pushing 60 and visibly greyed, with decades behind bars. The world he returned to had changed beyond recognition. New criminal players, new technology, and old alliances long vanished. Upon release, Warren was immediately bound by strict orders to keep him far from his old ways. Every phone, every bank account, every trip had to be reported to the authorities. The man who once thrived in the shadows now had a spotlight on him at all times. These days, the gangster who once reveled in the nickname "Cocky" claims he wants nothing more than peace and quiet. Perhaps the long years behind bars finally broke the cycle. Or perhaps he's simply grown tired of waging war against law enforcement. Either way, Curtis Warren's life is a cautionary tale of ambition and hubris, the story of how a streetwise kid from Liverpool built a drug empire that spanned continents, only to spend most of his adult years in prison. Gritty and unglamorous, his criminal career shows that in the drug underworld, the house always wins in the end. For Britain's one-time drug kingpin, the final chapter may still be unwritten, but his notorious legacy is already cemented in history.